today, I hereby predict that Rob Portman will win the Republican primary for the United States Senate in Ohio. Of course, I think he's going to win the general election also. This isn't really that difficult to track. Every time you remind Ohioans about Ted Strickland's record, his numbers get worse. So when that first poll came out about a year ago that showed Governor Strickland in kind of a name ID matchup running ahead, his negatives were down in the 20s. People forgot. The more we've been able to remind people about Ted Strickland's record, the more his negatives go up, the more that lead shrinks. Once his negatives are back over 50%, which they will be, when people remember what things were like in 2008, 2009, 2010, when Ted Strickland was governor. 400,000 jobs fleeing the state, a multi-billion-dollar budget gap with no plan to fix it other than almost certainly raise taxes, which he wouldn't admit to in the 2010 election cycle. And everybody in those days and those years knew someone, if it weren't themselves, a family member, a coworker, a neighbor who had lost their job, who was having their house foreclosed on, et cetera, and Ted Strickland fiddled. He wants to come back now, and when we remind Ohioans that he was the governor when the state was in that condition, they can go to the polls and know that there's no reason to vote for him. On top of that, we have Rob Portman, who has a fantastic record of fighting for jobs and fighting for Ohio in the United States Senate. I personally believe he's the best senator in the United States, and I'm looking forward to him returning to the Senate when he wins in November.
Matt, can you name a state that did well during the national recession?
My focus is on Ohio, and I live here in Ohio. I know what the situation we inherited was, and I know what the Strickland rhetoric on blaming everything on George Bush, blaming everything on a national recession, not coming forward with a plan for how he was going to help get Ohio out of this ditch, was not what Ohioans wanted to hear. They were looking for leadership. They were looking for somebody who had a plan. He said thank you to a stimulus package that came to the state, and he plugged it directly into a state budget, one-time money, to fill the budget gap, with no real plans to fill that budget gap when those one-time dollars weren't there. So it was a problem of leadership. It was a problem of when you're the governor of the state and a company like NCR is looking to leave, and you have the opportunity to sit next to the president or the CEO of NCR, and you don't even know who that person is, much less have the opportunity to talk to that person and say, here's why I think you ought to live in Ohio, stay in Ohio. We're going to do everything we can to keep the jobs here. We're going to do everything we can to make the environment better for you. You just blithely sit through dinner not even knowing who you're sitting next to. That's the wrong guy to have at the helm, and that's what voters decided in 2010. They'll decide that again in 2016.
Okay, my name wasn't mentioned like these debates, but I think Ted Strickland's was, so I'll rebut that. Let me just say big picture. Matt said the more they hear about Ted Strickland's record, the less they like him. He's still ahead, Matt, and that was after $12 million of attack ads spent last year by the Koch brothers and others saying everything you just said. And he's been ahead the entire time, and there are very few challengers in this country ahead of the incumbent senator. Ted Strickland is one of them. And why is that? It's because of the question that was just asked. Ohioans don't believe that the recession in 2008 started in Columbus. Go watch The Big Short. People know where it started, and they know it wasn't here. They also know that most of the growth in the last 4 or 5 years also didn't start in Columbus. We had a national recovery. It was led largely by things like the auto recovery, which people like John Kasich and Rob Portman were against. Now, I'll give John Kasich credit. He's really good at taking credit for a national recovery, just like Chris Christie is, and Scott Walker is, and all these folks running for president as governors are claiming credit for recovery that actually had a lot more to do with who the president was and the national economy than their own states. So people aren't buying, and that's why after $12 million of the exact stuff we just heard, Ted Strickland's still ahead because people don't buy it. They know the big picture. They know that we had a national recession. We've had a recovery. And here are the facts. In Ted Strickland's last year, we actually were the fifth quickest growing economy in the country. I saw a few years ago, John Kasich on a tweet saying, hey, we're improving. We were number 4 or 5 in Site Selection magazine for how competitive we were. When Ted Strickland was governor, we were number 1 or 2 all those years. So, of course, the context matters. And people can keep saying these things, but the reason he's still ahead, and you said, where's he been? He's ahead because people know who he is, they understand that context, and to continue to go back to blaming Columbus policy for a national recession just simply doesn't make a lot of sense. And when we get back to Ohio the last couple of years, yes, we have been part of a national recovery. But the facts are very, very clear, and I think it comes back to Ohio-based. We've had a national recovery that's lifted all states. But there's a reason why we have, for 38 consecutive months, trailed this country in our job recovery, the average job growth. And it's because trickle-down doesn't work. Hasn't worked in Ohio under John Kasich. It didn't work when George Bush was president. And so when you see our wages in Ohio are still below where they were in 1984, that explains why, yes, we have benefited from national recovery, but the average family in Ohio is still frustrated because the whole approach of 5 years of the current governor, masked very well by a national recovery, of balancing the budget by grabbing funds from schools and local governments and a tax on workers and increased sales taxes, which are regressive, flat wages, that doesn't lead to a robust recovery.
None of that is accurate, but...
Well, let me finish. So the big picture, the 38 straight months is absolutely accurate.
None of that is how we balance the budget, however.
Well, let me finish. Big picture, I don't want to go back and forth. Matt and I actually get along very well, so I don't want to get into too much back and forth. But 38 straight months, so big picture, they're not buying the blaming Ted Strickland. And while again, every Republican governor takes credit for this national recovery, in the end of the day, I think Ohio's a lot smarter than falling for it. And that's why we've seen literally this message, and I guess we'll keep seeing it, $12 million. As you all know, the equivalent of an entire statewide campaign has been run against Ted Strickland last year. The Koch brothers, I think it's the chemical industry group, whatever they are, and they've said it again and again. And he has not spent $1 the other way, and he's still ahead. That tells you how ineffective this message is.
So 64% of Ohioans voted for John Kasich for re-election last year, so I think they're buying it. It's going to cost a lot more than $12 million to run these Senate races next year, so if that's going to be Ted Strickland's budget and he's going to run on that particular message, now I'm very confident that Rob Portman is going to be re-elected in November. And the bottom line is that Republican leadership has worked. Republican leadership on these issues in Ohio has helped turn this state around. And the person who drove that ship, steered it into the rocks, was Ted Strickland. And we'll remind voters of that over the course of the year. And when it's all said and done, I'm confident that Rob Portman is going to win. On our side, I think the question was actually about the primaries. On our side, like I said, the big news of the day, Rob Portman will be the winner of the Republican primary, and there's a spirited primary going on the Democratic side. Cincinnati City Councilman, who I'm a big fan of and rooting for, in March, he's spending hundreds of thousands of $700,000, I think, TV buy that I saw being made on his behalf, and he was just endorsed by Dick Celeste, a Democratic governor of Ohio, who I think had the opportunity to review the record of another Democratic governor of Ohio and didn't think that it was worthy of sending him back to office. So there's a lot going on the Republican side in the presidential primary. There's maybe more going on the Democratic side, and there's more going on the Democratic side here in Ohio too in the Senate primary as well.
And by the way, you may have just really damaged PG's campaign with that.
He knows I'm all
endorsement.
for him. He knows.
You know how you know Rob Portman's worried? He just abandoned TPP. This has been his bedrock issue for years, trade. He's voted for all those trade deals. He's been a leader. Last year he voted for fast track. If he was as confident, Matt, as you are, he wouldn't have just gone full circle on the heart of who he's been in Washington all these years. That shows, and I'm sure he was told, listen, you're already struggling. The economic message is what Ohioans want to hear. You're on the wrong side of all these trade deals. And the fact that last week, and I'm sure everyone here raised their eyebrows when they saw him abandon the TPP, he was for the fast tracking of it a year ago, which basically means it would go through without changes, and now he's against it. That tells you, Matt, that he is not nearly as confident as you are in his chances, and for good reason. Ted Strickland remains ahead despite all those millions spent against him.
Okay. So